Can I ask? And then I transferred, but yeah, so we've both gone a very different route.
Yes.
You can't totally. Or would you rather me? Yeah, I think you should because of the live stream. But no, I don't work here. That's fine, totally, absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
Just remember, all the mics are on. It's streaming, so the mics are on.
Mics are all on?
Yeah.
Okay.
What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, apparently there's yeah. Whenever you're ready. Yeah, I think we're good.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Kupek, and I'm Legal Counsel and Communications Director with Alliance Defending Freedom. We are so honored to be here today, and thank you so much to Colorado Christian University and Dr. Jenna Lynn Ellis for hosting us here. Thanks to all of you who are sitting here with us, and also those of you who are watching with us online. It's certainly a privilege to be here. For those of you who don't know, Alliance Defending Freedom is the world's largest legal organization that advocates for the religious freedom of all people. And that's why we're here today. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, we're in some serious times. America's vigorous protection of free expression and religious freedom is one of its greatest contributions to this world. The free to believe and the freedom to act on those beliefs makes America unique, and in my opinion, is what makes America great. But these freedoms are unfortunately in jeopardy. We're in the midst of a conversation, and let's be honest, more than a conversation, some serious legal battles, over whether we'll allow those who seek to express ideas and were consistent with their conviction on marriage and the sanctity of human life to remain in civil society. The men and women who are up here with me right now, we'll have the privilege of hearing from them today, and they themselves have found themselves caught in the midst of this firestorm. But before we dive in and explore the human cost of what happens when the government fails to protect the freedom of expression and religious freedom, I want to frame our discussion by encouraging us to consider the following 3 points. First, religious freedom and the right of conscience benefits everyone, the religious and the non-religious alike. It applies as much to the evangelical and the Catholic as it does to the atheist. Our First Amendment freedoms ensure we all have the right to explore the meaning of life and to then order and express our life consistent with the answers we find. Second, if you followed any recent state legislative efforts here in Colorado or elsewhere across the country, you might think, or you might have heard, that religious freedom is about a license to discriminate. That's very sad and also grossly inaccurate. The reality is that it's what religious freedom is that inspires and even requires us to promote human flourishing. I think the Louisiana governor, Bobby Jindal, said it best when he said that America did not create religious freedom, but religious freedom created America. A recent study looking at the contributions that religion makes to the American economy by providing schools, soup kitchens, addiction recovery programs, and contributions by religious organizations tallied that at over $1.2 trillion annually to the American economy. So let's think about that for a moment. So if people are having a hard time understanding, say, the abstract components of religious freedom or what that actually means in the tangible everyday life, we know that Americans understand one thing typically, right? And it's the economy, and it's what's going on in their pocketbook. Well, I think it's a pretty staggering and certainly encouraging statistic that religious organizations contribute over $1 trillion annually in these really social welfare programs that they provide to the community at no charge. And by way of economic perspective, this is more than the global annual revenues of tech giants Apple and Microsoft combined, thanks to religious organizations. The third point I'd like us to consider before we listen to our guests today is that civil liberties travel together. If you care about any other rights and freedoms, you should care that this one is being eroded because it impacts all of us, regardless of our belief systems. When you look at other nations, nations that value free speech, freedom of the press, religious freedom, they have less war, less poverty, and less violence. They are also linked to greater economic well-being, equality for women, and respect for minorities. Religious freedom promotes diversity and other freedoms. It doesn't undermine them. So the constitutional guarantees that protect the people we're about to hear from and their right not to express ideas or celebrate events against their convictions protects all of us. Regardless of what we believe about marriage, a loss for them is a loss for each and every one of us, and will further undermine the path to true civility and diversity. The First Amendment principles that control here transcend and will far outlast the current dialogue about same-sex marriage. As our U.S. Supreme Court has explained, the freedom to differ is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be a mere shadow of freedom. The test of its substance is the right to differ as to things that touch on the heart of the existing order. So this stand for conscience, it's one of vital importance and one we must make, and we all will make at some point in our lives. It affects too many of us and far too deeply for us simply to sit on the sidelines. But rather than take my word for it, I want you to hear from some of our current clients who have taken this stand, and we're going to show a little video about this.
As a kid, the grown-ups used to ask us all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? I told them, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. In 1981, my dream came true. Being one of the first African Americans on the Shreveport Fire Department had significant challenges. After living a life experiencing a lot of discrimination, it gave me a conviction that should I ever be in a position of leadership, that I would never allow anyone to have the same experience I had as a minority. That's why I was so surprised that writing a book for a Christian men Bible study would cause my career to come to an abrupt end.
These tombstones represent the lives that are taken by abortion every single day in the United States of America. This is a personal issue for me. When I found out that our pro-life club on campus was denied, it shot me right back to when I was 16 and I found out that my mom considered aborting me. When we got the news, I was angry. They were denying us the opportunity to express our diverse viewpoint on campus.
Since the physician-assisted suicide law was passed, it certainly brought home the reality that we're in a whole new world in the field of medicine. Being forced to talk to someone about committing suicide and ending their life artificially and having me be complicit with it violates my sense of conscience because my role is to protect life. This is something that really could end my practice. If I'm forced to do this, I won't continue to practice medicine in this state. I would leave my practice. There is no compromise here.
At the end of 2016, there was a state law that was passed that would force pregnancy health centers to refer for abortions. The thought of actually having to give an abortion referral to a young woman was just unbearable. This law is such a violation of my conscience. It's really unthinkable because it really totally erases the whole reason why I'm here, the whole reason why Aim for Women is here.
5 years ago, we were approached by a customer who asked us to print a message that conflicted with my conscience. So we respectfully declined the order, and I had another print shop who would print the same job at the same price. But they ended up going to our local government, and they filed a lawsuit against us to try to get us in the future to print shirts that had a message that would conflict with my faith. I received a phone call after I made the decision to decline the message, and the gentleman called and didn't give me his name, and he just asked me, he said, "Are you sure you want to stand for this? Are you sure you're going to hold to your beliefs on this issue? I want to know before we do this." And I just said, I have no option. I said, I can't print that message, and he hung up on me. When that happened, I knew this wasn't going to be a small issue.
Every creative professional has a list of reasons why you would choose a project and why you would decline a project.
And that's true for everyone I work with. But there's a law in Minnesota that would force us to tell stories that conflict with our core beliefs. Preserving freedom of conscience is important for every single person. We don't want anyone to feel or fear that the government will punish them for simply holding an opinion that might be unpopular.
One of the great joys I have is leading a Christ-centered university, a faith-based university. This legislation, if it would have passed in its original form, would have ended up setting ourselves up for the possibility of being sued just for practicing what we believe.
Ministry is not just about being on a pulpit, but rather serving a community. So our church recently bought a property that we are developing to help victims of domestic violence. All of a sudden this law came out. That was going to make it very difficult for us to be able to serve these women that have been abused. So we worked with ADF to defend the freedoms that the church had.
Everybody in our country should care about right of conscience in all aspects of our public life. When someone else comes and dictates that you must do something against your conscience, it brings us back to some of the worst times in history. Everybody should care about this because if we're the first or some of the first to be targeted, it is assured that other professions will eventually be targeted.
Religious freedom helps everyone. It's not just freedom for me, it's freedom for everyone.
It's bigger than just this one person. It's about the freedoms for all of us to live by our conscience.
We were meant to be free. The world is a place that flourishes, that grows under freedom.
So I know these stories inside and out, and yet that video gets me every time. I don't know if you noticed in the beginning, there was a young woman who we represent, a college student. It was the tombstone display at her college, on a pro-life display. What's interesting is that's my alma mater. That's Queens College, a city university in New York City, and I was the only conservative and the only Christian in my political science program at the time. And so it's sad to me that we're now suing my school. I often had to speak up, but it hadn't gotten to the level that it is now. So it gets me when I watch that, thinking that's where I was 10 years ago or more. The bottom line, though, is none of us should be tricked into thinking that the law can be applied to Chief Cochran, the Little Sisters of the Poor, Blaine Adamson, everyone up here, and that it won't ever be applied to us. There is a human cost when the government ceases to ensure each of us is free to peacefully live and work consistently with our convictions. So I would ask you today, and I would ask you to consider as you listen to our guests, would you defend our most basic freedoms for both those you agree with and, even more importantly, those you disagree with? Well, as I've mentioned, we have 5 individuals today who are currently taking that stand for freedom. We have Blaine Adamson, who owns Hands On Originals from Kentucky. We have Jack Phillips, Masterpiece Cake Shop, just 10 minutes away here in Lakewood, Colorado, and obviously you know his case is pending and about to be argued at the U.S. Supreme Court on December 5th. Barronelle Stutzman, with Arlene's Flowers from Washington State. Carl and Angel Larson from Telescope Media, and Lori Smith, 303 Creative here in Colorado. They are joined by one of Alliance Defending Freedom's attorneys, Senior Counsel John Scruggs, and our moderator today is Dr. Jenna Lynn Ellis, who's assistant professor here at Colorado Christian, and she is an assistant professor of the Legal Studies program. Would you join me in welcoming our guests today?
Thank you, Carrie, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome to everyone who's here and joining us today. And a special thanks to Alliance Defending Freedom for being willing to come to this university and give our students and our greater Colorado community and everyone who is live streaming today the opportunity to listen to your stories and to understand why freedom ultimately is held so dear in America today, and why it's so important that we understand not only these stories, but why it's important to preserve and protect our religious liberty, our freedom of speech, all of these things that are essential to freedom from 2017 and beyond. So I am Jenna Ellis, and I'll be moderating today, and I want to start, of course, with Jack. You are the man of the hour, and how are you feeling about having your case heard at the United States Supreme Court?
You know, we're really thrilled. The highest court in the country, one of the most important courts in the world, has decided to take a look at this case because of its incredible importance, not just to me, but to everybody in this room, to especially creative professionals, to Americans who value their freedoms, their liberties to live and act according to their faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you tell us how you got started in cake design and why you named your shop Masterpiece Cake Shop?
Sure. When I graduated high school, I needed a job, and a guy that lived across the street from me owned a bakery, and so it was just natural to go to work for him, and he was gracious enough to hire me. And I found shortly after I started working there that I really enjoyed the baking environment. I liked the work, I liked the people, I liked pretty much everything about it. And shortly after that, he bought out another bakery, and they had cake decorators that he brought into the building. And I had never seen cake decorating before. And that was really intriguing because when I was in high school, when I was growing up, I always had a pencil in my hand. I always liked to draw stuff. And every elective I could get in school would be in the art room, drawing, painting, any of those things. And suddenly I realized that I could take these two fundamental loves of mine, baking and art, and combine them. So I decided at some point I would open a bakery of my own. And we came up with the name Masterpiece Cake Shop for a couple reasons. One, masterpiece, obviously a masterpiece, a fine work of art is a masterpiece, but it also, part of the word is master. And Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, no man can serve two masters. He will either love the one and hate the other, or will despise the one and love the other. No man can serve two masters. And I knew when I opened up that I would have to run my business in a way that served Jesus Christ, that I would represent him well. And I couldn't do it in order to make money, serve money. That is just, I wanted to serve Jesus Christ in everything that I do. And so even to this day, every time I write Masterpiece Cake Shop on a check or anything like that, when I see that word master, it reminds me who actually owns the shop and why I'm there.
And Lori, we'll turn to you. You actually have a special connection with Jack being from here in the local community. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Is this on? Well, Jack and I actually crossed paths about 10 years ago. Jack made my wedding cake. So I was pleased to meet him about 10 years ago. My husband and I always like to support small business. So naturally, when we were planning our wedding, I was looking for someone to put my vision to life, and that's when I crossed paths with Jack. And since then, over the last decade or so, Jack's beautifully created a number of cakes for my family. Birthdays, anniversaries, baby showers.
Yeah. And as a creative designer, that was also important and significant to you as well?
Absolutely. I think that I'm certainly creative behind a computer, but when it comes to my kitchen, that's a different story. So, Jack, you did a fabulous job. I've been very thrilled with
Thank you.
Your product.
Fantastic. And let's go to Carl. So Telescope Media Group, you also have a unique story on why you named that organization as well. Can you tell us about that?
Certainly. Am I on now? I'm on now. Great. So actually, it started when I was in college. So I was a physics major in college, just kind of as nerdy as you could get. I was math and science, and she believes me.
I never saw him.
And so I was always in the science building, always thinking really analytically, and one day we went on spring break with my parents, and I realized that my Power MacBook computer could plug into this new video camera that my dad got, and I just started telling stories. At that same time, I was involved in a really wonderful college ministry that changed the direction of our lives, and so I started making videos for our church. And so over time, I'm doing physics homework, and in my free time, I'd listen to or read sermons in the library. That was kind of my life. And so one really influential author, pastor, was John Piper. And he talks about magnifying God. And normally, so Psalm 34 says, "Magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together." And he says, there's two ways you can look at that. One way is that the world can say, you have a very small thing that you're making a big deal of. You're magnifying God like a microscope would. But the reality is we're supposed to magnify God like a telescope. We're supposed to see him, enjoy him, savor him, delight in him, because he's huge, because he's amazing. And we need things like telescopes to help us see him for what he really is. So we took the name Telescope Media Group because we wanted to create projects and create art, tell stories that are consistent with that. We want to make things that make God look like he really is. Doesn't mean we're going to work with solely Christian ministries, but we're always going to conduct ourselves in a way that magnifies God through what we do. So we've said from day one on our website, Telescope Media Group exists to glorify God through top quality media production. So we tell stories, and we've been doing that for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I've heard you say that creating films is incredibly personal to you. And so why is that so important to your professional life?
Well, part of the reason people hire us to tell their stories is because you can't separate the artist from the art. We're oftentimes we work with all people. We'll tell their stories, and we love that. But as an outsider, sometimes we can come in and see different aspects or tell their story in ways that they can't do as well themselves. And you can't separate the actual saying of the words, the story that you edit together, from the person who actually does it. It is an incredibly personal thing. So it's my work just as much as it belongs to anyone else.
And Blaine as well, you with Hands-On Original, that also has a unique story.
Yeah, I was a Delt at the University of Kentucky, and in my fraternity, I would always create party shirts. So that was interesting. But at the fraternity house one day, we were playing basketball, and this guy showed up, and he challenged me to a game of basketball. And he said, if you lose the game, I want you to come to my Bible study. And so I kind of sized him up, and I thought for sure I could beat this guy. But needless to say, I lost and was heading to his Bible study. And
ultimately ended up becoming a Christian through, I didn't know he played college ball and he was part of Campus Crusade for Christ, or I guess it's called Crew now. But there was a problem because suddenly, I went from making party shirts to making Christian shirts. And anyone that can remember, back in the 90s, Christian shirts were just terrible. They were the worst. And we always laugh about, instead of have a Coke and a smile, it would be like have Jesus and a smile. Just something you'd never want to wear. And so
I think my brother has a couple of those actually still. So
yeah. So we kind of, for myself, I just really wanted to create a shirt that kids who wore them would want to wear them and not just kind of hide them in the drawer after the event. And so that kind of launched Hands-On Originals, kind of my passion. So.
And you actually won your case, and so the court did say that designing and printing T-shirts is expressive, but also talk to us about how you've handled other requests, and you've actually declined some of those custom orders as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just over the years, we've had several requests. We had I'll just name a few. We had a biker group come in, a ladies biker group, and it was called Bikin' Bitches, and that was one we couldn't print. And then we had the best one in the office we talk about, and granted we're from Kentucky, right, is a youth group came in and they wanted Jesus on a bucket of chicken. And we still have no idea what they wanted to do with it, but then we've had Jesus as a pirate. That's a classic. Then we've had strip clubs. And then we had a pastor who came in. He wanted to print homosexuality as sin. And, for me, I don't see Jesus handling it that way, that he was kind of the master of balancing grace and truth. So that was one that we also couldn't print. So, yeah, we've had several that we have another local print shop who they take all our orders when we can't do something.
And so can you talk to us, too, about how you decline those orders and why that's important to you as a creative professional to make sure that your work ultimately is expressive of your sincerely held beliefs?
Well, for me, anything that we print, anything that comes off our press, it has a message. It's saying something. So, for us as owners, we just wanted to make sure the things that we were printing were things that God would be pleased with us printing. And so that's kind of why we set that up and, found that other local supplier who would, happily take anything that we couldn't print.
Mm-hmm. And to Jack as well, you also have some of those cakes, and it's a creative expression to you. And talk about what goes into that and kind of the day in the life of Masterpiece.
Yeah, so when somebody wants a cake, and one of my employees is in here, so she can attest to the fact that when somebody comes in to get a cake, it's fairly personal. We want to find out what the occasion is. If it's, say, for your grandma, what is your grandma like? We want to make not just a birthday cake that says Happy Birthday Grandma, unless that's what you want, but maybe find out if she has any special interests or hobbies or whatever, like if she does embroidering or gardening. Okay, so now we have a theme. Now how can we make it more personal and communicate a message that this family is celebrating this occasion, make it unique. So it's really a message. It's not just eggs and butter and sugar.
Mm-hmm. And you've also declined some orders as well. I think that hasn't really been in the media as well, knowing your story.
Yeah, well, one thing right off the top is we just got past Halloween, and we don't celebrate Halloween. We didn't celebrate it with our kids when they were growing up, and decided that we wouldn't celebrate that in the bakery, which, okay, so you check that off and you're not going to do it. But the reality is Halloween is a huge, huge moneymaker. It's second to Christmas in the retail world. It's third in the baking world because graduation, when you all graduate, you need to get a cake, and we're right over there at Wadsworth and Hamden. But that's our biggest time, and then Christmas is that, and then Halloween. But we decided that we would rather stand for our convictions there and not do those cakes than acquiesce to that. But it gives us good practice when somebody else comes in and wants a cake that we can't do, because we already are accustomed to saying, I'm sorry, that's something that we can't do. Cakes that would be anti-American or disparaging of somebody. I had a guy come in one time and he wanted me to make a cake basically to give to his boss and tell him that he was an idiot. And I'm not going to do that. You can make your own cake, you can do your own thing, but I'm not going to use my platform and my talents and abilities to insult and hurt somebody. I had somebody who wanted me to make a 3-tiered wedding cake, but only half of it to celebrate. celebrate their divorce. And divorce happens, but somebody in that relationship was hurt, probably both of them. So I wouldn't do something like that. So there are just a lot of messages, and to me, the cakes are messages. I'm using my talent, my gift that God's given me to create from scratch something unique to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to turn on to Angel as well, you know, because this is a very personal, as you can see on this panel. I mean, these are stories that ultimately your creative expression is a part of you, and it drives your business and what you do. And that's very important to both Carl and Angel and your personal story. How do you show Christ's love and bring love and show that diversity?
Well, we have 8 children, and because of that, we can't travel the world. And so we bring the world to our table, and it's something that is quite amazing because we have a 12-foot table, and when you come to our house the very first time, you get to sign your name with a Sharpie underneath of it. And it is incredible to bring international students, college students, because we were deeply impacted in college because people took us in and loved us and shared with us the vision of what God has for our lives if you live in community and you really invest in people. And so when we bring Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, people from the LGBTQ community into our home, it breaks down barriers because we get to sit down and have a great meal together. We get to talk, we get to share ideas. We may disagree at the end of the day, but they go home knowing that we really, really love them. And our children grow up and they have no idea actually how blessed they are to grow up and be able to intermingle with all of you. Like college students are not scary to them at all. They will go up and want to play a game and talk to you and engage with you. And so we've been extremely blessed by bringing the world to our table.
Yeah. And Carl, for you as well, I mean, this is something you were telling me earlier, that this is how your family really loves people and shows them Christ's love and brings in people from all kinds of diverse backgrounds.
Absolutely. So this year for Christmas, we had, I might get the numbers a little wrong, so don't hold me to it, but we had three Muslims, 3 Buddhists, and a student who was bisexual who spent the holiday with us because we love opening our home for people who don't have any other place to go. We intentionally don't spend holidays with family so that we can be the place where people gather so they can feel loved, so they can spend time together. And there's nothing better than being able to have conversations. Part of the reason we're willing to engage in this is because we believe freedom is good for everyone. If we can't say, where are you coming from? What do you believe? Here's what I believe. If we can't have that conversation, then we can't really have friendship. We can't really know each other in the way we ought to know each other. It's a safe place. We love having people in our home. We love having people who are different from us. Our beliefs actually draw us towards people who are different from us for that very reason. So we love living like this. We love engaging people who are different than us, and it's okay if you don't believe what we believe. When we filed our case, which you'll hear details on in a little bit, is I get phone calls from people angry of saying, I can't believe what you believe, or just a lengthy phone call, angry. And it would usually end with something along the lines of, I'm so glad that you can tell me that. Because I'm fighting not just for my freedom to live according to my convictions. I want you to be able to live according to your convictions. And when the government has the power to tell us what we must say or what we can't say, that's not good for anyone.
And so Lori as well, I mean, it's really people and the love for people that drew you into your current profession. So can you tell us about why you opened your own business, 303 Creative?
Sure can. So I grew up with a family of entrepreneurs, and I've always been a creative person. I remember when I was young, I loved crafts and creating things and making things for family and friends. And when I was 6, my mom opened a boutique, and I spent a lot of my younger years working with her in her business and learning the ins and outs of small businesses and the challenges and the reward. And so when I graduated college with a degree in business marketing, I spread my wings and I entered the big world of work, corporate world of work, and I have to be honest, I just was frustrated that I didn't have the flexibility to use the skills in a way that I wanted. But this dilemma resulted in the inspiration of my business, 303 Creative. So today I use the skills that
God has blessed me with to create custom logos and graphics and websites for my clients.
Yeah, and so we'll turn to Baronelle now as well, and you can see through these stories that this is very deeply personal and using all of your creative skills and talents to participate in your business. And Baronelle, you're a florist out of Washington State, and many people are familiar with your case, but can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your story?
Well, I'm a little florist in Richland, Washington, and I've been in business for 47 years. Have 10 employees, and we consider our store a mission field. We want people from their joys and also to share in their sorrows. And one of the things we get to do is sympathy work. And when somebody comes in and they're grieving, we have a chance to help them, to pray with them, to comfort them. And we ask about the person that passed away, and they'll tell us, you know, it was Grandpa, and he liked to fish, or he liked to hunt. So after we get through talking to him, then we get to create something that represents Grandpa. And we always ask our customers to come in and look at the funeral pieces before we send them out. So we'll make a sympathy piece with a fishing pole and a fish swimming through the water, or something that represents Grandpa. And when they come in and they go in the cooler, they just burst into tears. And they go, "That's Grandpa." Then we know we've done our job. And one of my favorite customers was Rob Ingersoll, and he's one of the gentlemen that's suing us. I waited on Rob for almost 10 years and loved doing it. He was very creative. He would come in the shop and he would say, "This is for my birthday," or "This is for Kirk's anniversary," or whatever, and pick out an unusual vase and say, "Do your thing," which I love because I get to go out of the box and make something really unique and different for him. And I love doing those arrangements, and Rob really liked my work. I knew that Rob was coming in to talk to me about his wedding. He had been in twice before. So when he came in, before he got too far into talking about his wedding, I just put my hands on his and I said, "Rob, I'm sorry. I can't do your wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ." And he said, "I understand." He said, "My mom feels that way too, but I'm hoping she'll walk me down the aisle." We talked about how he got engaged, why they decided to get married. We chit-chatted for a while. He asked me if I would recommend another florist. I recommended 3 that I knew would do him a good job. We hugged each other and Rob left. His partner, Kirk, put something on Facebook that night that was very simple. It said, "Baronelle has every right to believe the way she does, but she hurt our feelings." It went viral from there without any complaint to the Human Rights Commission. The Attorney General of the state of Washington filed a lawsuit against me saying, "You will do same-sex weddings, you will donate $5,000 to the gay lesbian youth group, and we'll forget the whole thing." I said, "No, thank you. My freedom and my faith is not for sale." The ACLU got a hold of Rob and Kurt, and they also sued me personally and corporately. If we lose our lawsuit, we will lose pretty much everything we own. Our retirement, our life savings, our business, because the ACLU attorney fees are going to be well over 7 figures. Rob and Kurt had enough offers to do 20 free weddings.
And can you tell us, Baronelle, what was it like having to tell your friend of 10 years that you couldn't do flower arrangements for his wedding?
It was very difficult to tell Rob. He's a very special person to me. And I just was hoping that he would accept it gracefully, which he did. But if Rob walked into my shop tomorrow, I would hug him, I would catch up on his life, and I would wait on him for another 10 years if he would allow it.
Thank you. And turning now to our attorney on the panel, John, you know, Baronelle has talked about how this type of a lawsuit will affect both her business and her private life. Can you explain it to especially our students in the audience what that means from a legal perspective?
Sure. Her case is a bit unusual. Anytime you have the Attorney General kind of roaming the internet to find something problematic and then suing a florist, it's a bit strange. But in her case especially, typically when you make a corporation, whether it be an S corporation or LLC, those are just names, that any act you do in your corporation, it's the corporation acting, and you're protected from personal liability. But the way they've done the law in Washington is they've sued Barronelle, the ACLU is particularly, not just in her corporate capacity, so not just her corporate assets, but her personal assets. So that would be her retirement, her home, her 401k. So in this respect, everything she has is on the line. And all these clients are facing a lot of severe penalties, like the Larsons facing a law that has 90 days jail time.
And can you talk about that? Carl and Angel's case deals with a pre-enforcement claim, and can you explain what that is and why that's very important for the students as well as the community to know and understand that from a legal perspective?
Sure. A pre-enforcement lawsuit is just a lawsuit that is filed before you violate the law. And it makes a lot of sense, right? You shouldn't have to go to jail and pay fines and pay these penalties to challenge a law that's unconstitutional. And so the legal system allows you to go to court and say, hey, court, what are my rights? Am I protected or am I not? I'm afraid the government's going to come after me. And these things happen all the time. They've been happening since 1925. I think that was the first time the Supreme Court recognized a pre-enforcement lawsuit. And groups like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood regularly file what are called pre-enforcement lawsuits. And I'll say this, it's a good thing that we have this system, because an unconstitutional law doesn't just affect them, it affects all of us, that other creatives in these fields are being silenced and chilled. So we should encourage people to challenge laws that restrict our freedoms rather than wait and have to go to jail to do so.
And can you give us some examples of other types of pre-enforcement challenges?
Sure. Like I mentioned, the first one in 1925, Pierce versus Society of the Sisters, involved a law that outlawed homeschool and required students to go to public school. And so that was a pre-enforcement challenge. In the 70s, there were many pre-enforcement challenges involving restrictions with respect to Vietnam and speech about Vietnam, about literature distribution. Steffel versus Thompson in 1974 is a famous pre-enforcement lawsuit. And like I mentioned, essentially every abortion lawsuit that you might hear in the news is a pre-enforcement lawsuit. So these things are very common in the civil rights context.
And so then turning to Carl then and Angel as well, so this positions your case a little bit differently, and since you filed, some people have questioned that decision and said, well, that's really not compassionate or loving. How have you processed that, and how would you respond to those types of criticism?
Sure. So we're in a fairly unique situation, but it all stems back to the original story of we love all people. Our lives were radically changed by people who brought us into their home when we were college students. So there's a couple who, they had 4 little kids, they jumped on their beds, and we'd have breakfast over at their place on Saturday mornings, that sort of place, and they modeled what marriage looked like for us. They just loved us as college students. There was no reason we had to be over there, but they just welcomed us into their home. And when we got married, we decided we wanted to be that kind of family. We wanted to have a really open door. We wanted to love people. And because of that, we're just naturally involved in the lives of college students. Well, college students get married. Usually, oftentimes. And I've actually had the opportunity to officiate 2 weddings of people along the years, and we've, for a number of years, done premarital counseling with friends or members of our church because we love marriage, we love people. And so our business wants to tell marriage stories. We want to tell marriage stories particularly because we believe God has bound himself to the marriage story. So the Bible begins with a marriage story in the garden, and it ends with a wedding celebration. And all the way through the Bible, marriage is an analogy to help us understand this relationship that God is offering to us through Jesus. And so we see marriage as a really critical opportunity to magnify God, to talk about what God's really like. So we'd like to enter the marriage or wedding market, but when we heard about the laws in Minnesota, we ran into this problem going, if we enter the marketplace at all, specifically to tell the stories about the glory of God in marriage, we'd be forced to tell all stories about marriage. And that's why we challenged the law beforehand.
And Angel, I'll turn to you as well. How have these kinds of criticisms really affected you personally, and what's your response as well?
Yeah, I guess it's really hard. We try to stay off of social media because my hair is a big topic. People like to very much mock and ridicule, and it just gave me a compassion for the cyberbullying and what, would you say that to my face? And made me it just made me love people, because actually hurt people hurt people. And so when I think of all this vulgar stuff coming at us, it gives me two responses. One, I want to love you, and two, I really want to educate you. And I really want you to see and hear. Like, we may differ on opinion, but I still, at the end of the day, want you to realize that freedom for all people, freedom for creative professionals, really will help America flourish.
And,
okay. Just to add to that, one other point is that because this is, the question that prompted this is that, how is this loving, right? And so the law in Minnesota says that I can't enter the wedding market. Or if I do, and I have a request that my conscience won't allow me to do, I'm facing 90 days of jail and $25,000 of fines. So my options are bad all the way around. I could not enter the market and silence myself. I could enter the market and know that I'm going to get in trouble with the law. Or we could challenge the law beforehand. And so it's not just for us that we're trying to gain some sort of special privilege. We want freedom for everyone to live according to their convictions. So any wedding photographer who's in the business, or a videographer, really any creative professional in this realm, it's loving when you see an injustice to try to right it. So to see an injustice and do nothing is actually to participate in the injustice itself. And that's why this is ultimately a loving thing. We want to work for the good of all people.
And John, I think you can comment as the attorney on this as well. You know, these types of laws, there's this perception out there that any law in the books must be constitutional. We need to follow it no matter what. And so from a constitutional perspective, can you kind of dispel that myth for us?
Sure. I mean, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Oftentimes, lower levels of government will, pass some crazy laws sometimes, putting penalties and fines on people who just want to say certain messages, who just want to, express their beliefs in certain ways. And that just goes against the First Amendment. It goes against a lot of our constitutional principles. So those lower laws that are passed by cities or states, even by the federal government, they have to comply with the First Amendment, comply with the supreme law. So that's all we're doing. We're going to court to say, hey, court, this is the most important thing, this Constitution that binds us all together. You've got to follow that, not these other laws.
And Blaine, obviously, these cases are very, very difficult personally, and you've talked with us a little bit about your darkest hour. You're sharing with me this morning. Can you tell us about that a little bit more?
Sure. Well, it was when it all hit the media. The mayor of our town came out against us, and they had contacted some of our customers, the University of Kentucky. We were their top vendor for over 10 years, and several of our customers, and they all came out in one big media blitz without us even knowing about it, that they were all pulling their business from us. And so I was driving home that day. I walked through the door, and my wife, who's here, she had been on social media. So we learned also really quick, you can't do that. She's just like, the things they're saying about you, Blaine, they're not right. And we went down to our bedroom, and I remember we really didn't know what to say. And a phone call came in, and it was a business associate of mine. And he said that the University of Kentucky had called him, and he owned 18 stores, 120 employees. And even though we had nothing to do with them, just an association, they said that they were threatening to pull his license, which he was like, Blaine, that's 120 employees who will lose their job. Are you sure about this decision? And I just hung up the phone, and we literally hit the ground and just wept. We were just like, God, I'll serve you no matter what the consequences are. I said, but, just please don't let these people lose their jobs.
And so this really becomes a freedom of conscience issue, and John, I wanted to go back to you to talk about that a little bit more. And the perception often in the media of these cases is framed as something that's very discriminatory, but really this is about the freedom of conscience of all of these creative professionals. And why is it so important with Alliance Defending Freedom? And I think Carrie's going to actually answer this one. Why is it so important to ADF to preserve and protect ultimately that fundamental right?
If we don't have the freedom of conscience and to peacefully speak, live, and act and create consistently with our convictions, what kind of freedom do we have? And what's interesting about these particular laws that I think all of the folks up here are being prosecuted under. To take it out of marriage just for a moment, just to give you an idea of what this is, to show that this issue really transcends marriage, even though the marriage is the hot topic of today. So for instance, political affiliation in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, that's a protected class. And so under those laws, these same kinds of laws that the folks up here are suffering under, a Democrat speechwriter could be forced to write a speech at the direction of President Trump. So in theory, in Washington, D.C., President Trump could file a complaint with the local commission and force a Democrat to write a speech for him in his direction. Or, you know, many Muslims have a conviction about creating visual depictions of Muhammad and the prophets. Well, under these same laws, a Muslim painter would be forced to paint for a religious customer a mural of Muhammad and, you know, the prophets and things like that. And the list, obviously, as you can imagine, goes on. And some of the hypocrisy in the way these laws have been applied have really been striking. In fact, right here in the Lakewood, Denver area, there was a situation where a gentleman went to several bakeries in the area and he asked for a cake. Cakes that custom cakes expressed a message promoting traditional marriage. And it had a specific message that was more against same-sex marriage. And he asked for these cakes, and all 3 bakeries declined. So this gentleman went ahead and filed a complaint with the local commission, the same commission that ruled against Jack Phillips. And that commission said that those bakeries were free to create consistently with their convictions and that they were okay. Versus Jack's situation was completely different. And Jenna will talk a little bit more about what exactly the commissioners said to Jack Phillips. So the last thing I would just point out as far as how this has been perceived or how it's been discussed in the media, or probably even in some of your social circles, let's be honest, this is a topic that people that discuss around dinner tables, and who knows, it might even come up at Thanksgiving. We need to be very clear about something. Everyone up here serves all people. For them, it's never about the person, and it never will be. It's about the message, it's about the event that they're being forced to celebrate and forced to participate in. All of them have customers from all walks of life, including those who identify as LGBT. A number of the people up here have LGBT employees. And so for this, some of the rhetoric that you've seen out there, that this is anti-this or anti-that, it's just not true. And I really think it's our job here in this room to do what we can to continue to you know, talk about the facts, because these are the facts.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, you know, for every generation, there's usually some topic that is controversial. And so today, it's marriage, but tomorrow it could be something else. And that's really the question we're asking, is do we want to empower the government to get to decide what artists can promote and can't promote? That's a dangerous power. It's a power that's potentially going to affect you, that will affect everyone in this room, everyone in future generations. And it's people like our clients up here taking a stand and saying, you know, the artist should get to draw the line, not the government.
And so thankfully, the Supreme Court is now paying attention to at least one of these cases with Jack. And you have a great story about when you first heard that the Supreme Court was taking your case. And the oral argument, by the way, will be December 5th. And then hopefully we'll get a decision early in spring, and we'll be paying attention to that. But your story is great.
Yeah, there's a website. It's called SCOTUS blog. SCOTUS is Supreme Court of the U.S. And the Supreme Court has different things that they cover weekly through their term. And one of them is conferencing. That's where they go through all the cases that they have and decide whether they're going to hear it, deny it, or look at it again next week. So through almost all of last year, I would be on the computer every Monday morning, SCOTUS blog, to see if they'd made a decision on my case. And I'd look at it, no decision. Next week, look at it, no decision. Finally, the last day of the term says, masterpiece is granted. Like, I couldn't breathe. I'm all alone in the bakery except for a homeless guy who comes in all the time. Hey, I get to go to the Supreme Court. Yeah, I got to go to court on Wednesday too. Yeah, I don't need a parole officer though. So.
And this has been, Jack, just knowing, I mean, you're 10 minutes away here from CCU, and just knowing you and knowing your faith, this, of course, is very deeply personal. And yet, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, that director had compared this instance to the Holocaust. And so describe that and how that made you feel.
First of all, the commissioner of the Civil Rights Commission described religious freedom as despicable rhetoric. You go to a Christian college, so I think you probably value religious freedom. She thinks it's despicable. She compared people who use religious freedom. She said that, well, all kinds of things have been used by people promoting religious freedom, like slavery and the Holocaust. And I personally find that very offensive, because my dad fought in World War II, and he fought across France, he fought across Germany. He was wounded in a mortar attack. They sent him to England, they patched him up, sent him back again. And while in Germany toward the end of the war, he was part of a group that helped liberate one of the first concentration camps. He talked about the smell, the horror, the horrors of war, and for her to compare not making a cake to the Holocaust is just, it's ludicrous. It's crazy. To think that she has control over my life is bizarre.
And you and your family have actually received death threats and other types of threats. Can you talk about that and how you've personally had to process through that?
Oh, right off the bat, the phone started ringing, and these guys know what it's like, but the phone calls are, they're vicious, they're vulgar, they're hateful beyond what you would imagine. And so I started answering the phone all the time, and so to protect the girls who worked for me from hearing the stuff that was coming across, because people aren't actually mad at them or me, they're mad at God, they're just not on speaking terms with him. So one day I get a phone call, and the guy says he's coming, he's going to shoot me. And so I figure I have to do something, because my daughter's in the shop with her 4-year-old. So I tell them, go in the back, don't come out unless I tell you. And I call the police. And the guy is calling, he even knows that my daughter's there. He knows her name, and it's pretty easy to find that out now, but back then you would have to have some sort of information that she was actually there on the site, and so that was pretty frightening. So made her get in the back, the police came, they couldn't trace anything. But just to think that somebody would actually come and do something like that because we don't agree on what God's definition of marriage is really frightening.
And you've actually lost about 40% of your business through this whole endeavor?
Yeah, the Civil Rights Commission, the one that said that the other bakeries could deny these cakes because they were denying the message, claimed that I'm not concerned with the message, I'm denying the people. But like everybody else, we serve everybody. Everybody, I'm in business, retail. I want people to come in my shop. I don't necessarily have them come over to my house and right under my table, but I want to befriend them. I want them to come in and become longtime customers. They come in, they have a coffee, just sit down. They come in just to talk. I want, I love that kind of thing. And so we serve everybody. But this commission determined that I turned away this event, this message, because of these two men, because of their sexual orientation, which, as I've thought about recently, they didn't tell me what their sexual orientation was. We'd never got that far, so as far as I know, they could have just been wanting to get married to, get better tax benefits. But the commission said that that's why I turned them away, and said that I have to change my policies and start creating cakes for same-sex couples, have to retrain my staff, I have to report to the commission every quarter for 2 years of every cake that I've turned away, and there's one other thing that I can never remember. But in order to comply with their demand, or not comply with their demand, rather than make cakes for same-sex weddings, we decided not to make wedding cakes at all, so we've shut down that part of our business, which was about 40% of our income, and that's pretty substantial. If you were a Walmart and you lost that much dollars in a year, you'd want to know why. And we're just a small bakery. they were all in there today, and you can see that it's really small. And I recognize a lot of people in here who've been in my store, and you know it's just a little place. So that was a huge hit. But our God is faithful, and He's provided our needs. Our bills are all paid,
and all of you probably never expected to be in this position as creative professionals and to be kind of at the heart of a lot of this litigation. And Blaine, I wonder if you can talk about just what that has been like for you personally, wanting to ultimately serve God and go with your sincerely held religious beliefs and really have a business. Ultimately, you're here now. Mm-hmm. What has that journey been like for you?
Well, we would never have asked for this. I mean, our business was successful. The last thing that we would want to do is bring something like this on us. But I want to echo something that you're saying to add to this, that, you know, we really, all of us, and I know these guys now, we'll serve anyone regardless of who they are, what their belief systems are. And, you know, for the very festival that we had to decline to print that message, there was a lesbian band called Mother Jane. And the media, most people don't know about it, but we passed their CDs around our office. We gave them out to everyone. We printed shirts for them for that exact event. And, you know, those are just some of the facts that don't get out there, that, you know, we'll work with anyone it doesn't matter what they believe. It's just all about the message that we're asked to promote. And one other thing that I'll throw out there is that, you know, as we've been dealing with this whole issue, there's a screen print company in New Jersey, and it's a lesbian-owned screen print company, and they had come out and in defense of us, you know, because they understand that these freedoms that we have travel together, and that if we're forced to do something, they will be forced to do something. And so I've got a relationship with them. I flew up to New York to see them, and you know, it's just neat to see that even though we're different, you know, we don't agree on the main point, that we do agree that freedom is important for everybody. So, yeah, I mean, we run our businesses to honor God. I mean, everyone here I know, and how we're painted in the media is not who these people are.
Mm-hmm. And Baronel, going to you as well, did you ever think that something like this would happen to you?
This was not on our bucket list. We had no idea. We were in our own little bubble, and we still feel we did nothing wrong. You know, Rob and Kurt have every right to live consistent with their faith and their beliefs, and that's the only thing we're all asking for here. It's not just our story, it's everybody's story that has the beliefs we do. So it's extremely important that we win this case for our freedoms, all of our freedoms.
And you mentioned oh, go ahead, Angel. Yeah, you want.
Well, I just want to say we have a little different because we actually chose to be in the line of fire, and with that, I think God really prepared us in the last 20 years of being together and watching all these little pieces, and we get to this point, and we look and we ask God, "Are you really asking us to do this? Are you asking us to lay everything on the line?" Our business, you know, our reputation. And when we prayed about it, it was yes. He asked us to do this. He asked us to walk this road. We knew it wouldn't be easy. We knew that it would be very difficult at times. Things that we never expected, people that would come against us. But at the end of the day, we still have a peace knowing that God has called us for this very purpose. And every one of you will have times in your life where you'll walk to this road and God will ask you, which way are you going to choose? And I challenge you to take the road that God wants you on, because it will lead to much more riches than taking the easy path.
And so describe your path, Baronel, from the time that you shared with us about your friend Rob and that experience. What has happened from the point that the lawsuit was initiated until now? And so what has happened through your case from the time that you were declined to participate in that floral arrangement until now? How has that affected you personally?
We went to the local judge first, and he basically said that you can have your faith, but you keep it in the four walls of the church. He said you can have your faith, but you can't practice it. And then we went to the Washington State Supreme Court, which voted 9-0 against us, saying they have 68-page letter, whatever you call it, 68-page
opinion.
Thank you. That said how vicious we were and how terrible I was to turn down Rob and Kurt. So, and the media, when the media came out, nothing, the story, you know, they just take blurps and pieces. But I have to tell you, there's also been a good part of this and many, many blessings from this. We've heard from 68 countries, as many of these people have here. We've had phone calls and letters and cards and support of people coming in. So God has been very faithful in taking care of us.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask also Carl and Angel and the rest of the panel as well, how have you seen people from all different walks of life and faith actually support and encourage you as well?
One of our students that comes over quite regularly is a Muslim from Kuwait.
Yeah.
Yes, I think he's from Kuwait. Anyways, he comes over and he starts asking us, because we've been in the local paper, we've been quite prominent, and he said, hey, I want to talk to you about this, you know, and we have this fantastic discussion about freedom and creativity, and he's actually really not that creative. But he understands it. So it's very easy to convince a creative person why this is really important. It's much harder to convince the logical, non-creative person. And he looks at us and he's like, you know what? You guys are the real deal. I got your back. I got your back. And that just, I mean, I got a little teary-eyed, and I'm like, wow, like, that's amazing that you are going to stand up for us, because he has many friends on the college campus of all walks of life, and to know that there's one person on the campus that really understands and is willing to fight for us.
And just to add to that, I think what's so important is that we can disagree on, for example, with Jack, we can disagree on marriage, and we should all support Jack. His case is for everyone's freedom. And it's so good to have the ability to disagree so that conversation can continue. We don't want to end conversation. We don't want to end freedom. We want to continue conversation. We want to continue dialogue, and that's really, really important. So I would say, especially if you support same-sex marriage, we should all support freedom to live according to our conscience. And that's what every single one of these cases is about.
And that's a great segue back to John and Carrie. What are some of these central themes of Masterpiece, and what will the Supreme Court be hearing on December 5th?
Sure. So the two primary arguments in the Masterpiece case before the Supreme Court is a compelled speech claim. The First Amendment basically says the government can't come in and tell you what you can't and cannot say. It can't force you to say things. And then the secondary claim is a free exercise claim, also a part of the First Amendment, that basically says that people of all faiths have the right to live out their faith, not just in the church, but also outside the church in their business. And as Carrie mentioned, in this situation, there's an element of targeting of certain people of faith, because the Colorado Commission is allowing some cake artists and bakeries to decline requests, but saying that Jack has to be compelled to convey messages that he disagrees with. So another way to think about it is it seems that the people of faith always lose. And that is an element of targeting that is just not something the First Amendment allows. And so the Supreme Court is going to hear oral arguments on December 5th. We've already had around 100 amicus briefs, which is other groups file their own briefs in support of this case. There have been 46 filed in support of Jack, which has been very exciting to see different groups, even groups that are in favor of same-sex marriage, coming out and saying this issue is not just about marriage, it's bigger than that. It's about freedom for all people. So all that's going to happen on December 5th, and you'll probably see more about that in the news. And we're really excited to present these great arguments before the court.
Another thing you may have seen in the news recently, which it seems ridiculous, but it's actually happening, is that Jack has recently got a couple of orders from Satanists to create custom cakes celebrating, as they say, Lucifer. And obviously that's not something that not only a Christian artist, but I don't think a lot of artists would probably like to do. And they have threatened him and said, well, we'll be filing a complaint with the local commission. But I think it illustrates what's happening here. The fact that you could have a group that say, we want you to do this, despite the fact that it violates who you are, right? Because we hear a lot from the other side of how it violates who they are, and it's important to listen. It's important to listen to what everyone's thinking and what everyone's feeling here. But we need to also be listening to when people up here, people of faith, it violates who they are. It violates the core of their identity as well. So that's just something you may have seen in the news recently, but that is actually happening. And it just kind of reflects the depth of this situation, that artists could actually be forced to create work that just violates the core of who they are.
Yeah, and I hope that this has been very enlightening to everyone in the group, that this is so much more about just religious liberty or just Christians or just our sincerely held religious beliefs, but ultimately it's about protecting and preserving the freedoms that we hold dear in this country. And so some final thoughts from the panel. I want to go to Jack first and just ask you for your final thoughts, and just did you ever think that standing firm in your beliefs would result in this kind of just violence and ultimately prominence for you? I mean, you're the face of this cake shop case right now.
No, there's just no way to imagine that this could ever happen. You just open a business, and all you want to do is provide for your family, do something that's gratifying, and find out that you could change. You could change the course of this country. Well, I'm not going to. The justices will or will not. But ultimately, God is the one who put all 9 of those justices on their bench. It says so in Daniel. He puts kings on thrones and he takes them down. So he doesn't have like middle managers that take care of justices. He does all that personally himself. So I know that whatever the resolution of this is, it's in his hands.
And Angel and Carl, is there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the students that are here and the community?
I think the core of all of this is that we work with every single person. In fact, we work hard to find ways to work with people that are different than us. So I've had an ongoing relationship with a college doing a Christmas concert, and they no longer want me to participate with them because of my views on marriage. Even though what we're celebrating is nothing to do with marriage. We should be able to have conversations and association in a world that's free. And freedom is good for everyone. Freedom is what the human heart's made for. And if we win, if Jack wins, that is a win for every person in society, regardless of what you believe, regardless of where you are. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. And Blaine, any particular thoughts that you wanted to share, especially with small business owners?
Well, small business owners. I think in our society right now, in many ways, we try to kick the can down the road and let the next generation kind of deal with it. But when it deals with freedom, we can't do that, because once we lose it, it doesn't come back. So I know that my daughter just started college this year, and I've got 2 coming behind it. And I feel a huge responsibility not to kick the can down the road. And, for them, it's been really good because they've had to really weigh the cost. They've seen that there is a cost to serving Christ. That, do I really believe this, what's written in this book? And so my challenge to you guys, especially in college, is that, if you land on your feet where you really believe what the gospel teaches, what Christ taught, what his Father taught, if you come to that point to know what you believe and be ready to stand up for what you believe regardless of what comes, because there's that scary thing that Christ promises us to conform us into the image of his Son. And that usually takes pain. And so that's my challenge to you guys today. Know what you believe in and stand regardless, because he's faithful.
And I wanted to end with Baronel and just what your final thoughts are and an encouraging word to our students.
You are all here for a purpose, and I have no clue what that is, but God does. He's given you the wisdom. He's given you the challenge, the responsibility, your mind to use for him if you're willing to surrender that. Not for your ego, not for your pride, but for God's glory. And when my grandkids come to me and say, Grandma, what happened to our freedom? Or worse yet, when I'm kneeling before Christ and he picks up my face in his hands and he says, Baronelle, what did you do to uphold my name? I don't want my answer to be, I did nothing.
And I think this has been a really informative panel today, and I hope that it's encouraged all of you. And so to Carrie and John, for those in our community and our students here who want to get more involved, you have a lot of programs. You have the Blackstone Fellowship, you have the Arete program, and so just to bring it back to ADF's ultimate mission of preserving and protecting freedom and liberty, how can the community now, when they've been so inspired by these clients, get more involved and ultimately help out?
So a few things. One, you could certainly connect with us on social media. We could always use help on Twitter and Facebook and sharing our clients' stories and videos and tweets and all that. So that would be the first thing I would ask that everyone does and help. And in fact, we have a hashtag for Jack's case, and it's called #JusticeForJack. So you're going to see a lot that goes on that in the beginning of December, all centered around that theme. The second thing you can do for updates on our cases, you can go to adflegal.org, and you'll see more videos and stories and all that. And if you want to, as a college student, we have a college program called Arete, and I'm happy to talk more about that with you afterwards. We're always really interested and engaging, certainly the next generation, because you guys are the future. It sounds cheesy, but it's really true. And I know we all think that up here. I almost went into college ministry years ago, and I went to law school instead. But I'm a huge believer in this is it. This is here, right here. So,
and no, Carrie and I both were in your shoes not all that long ago, and they told us that as well. And you know, now Carrie's doing a lot with ADF, and so that could be all of you in just a few years. So it really does happen, and you are the future, absolutely.
We have a Blackstone Legal Fellowship, that's for law students. We also have something called an ambassador program, and those are post-student age, and those are if you want to be an ambassador, a representative for ADF in your communities, and host gatherings where you can share the stories of the people up here, and be that face in your community for all the work that we're doing. We would love to have you do that as well, and of course, we could always use your prayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the one last thing that you can do as well is to join Colorado Christian University and the Centennial Institute. Tomorrow we're having a rally for Jack to send him off to the Supreme Court with our full support, and that will be at 10 a.m. tomorrow in our event center, and that's hosted by the Centennial Institute. You can find out more about that event on Alliance Defending Freedom's page, as well as Centennial/events. But I just want to thank all of our panel for coming to share your story and to put a face and a name and a history and an impression and all of these things. I mean, we're so much a feelings-driven society, yet we tend to look at these cases as just purely legal and what's going on in the Supreme Court, and it seems very esoteric. But to bring this down to a human level and to see how this is really affecting each of your individual lives, and how ultimately the decision that's going to be rendered in Jack's case will ultimately affect the direction of religious liberty, compelled speech, all of these things that John and Carrie talked about today. It's going to affect each and every one of us. So thank you so much to the clients here and to Alliance Defending Freedom for joining us today. Thank you to all of you as well. And we're dismissed. Thank you.